This podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not provide medical advice. It exists simply to entertain and to inform. Oh, hey, another quick word about this episode. Just wanted to make you aware that we will be discussing some medical history as it pertains to women's reproductive health, and that will include some things like early contraceptives and devices, etc. Nothing graphic, certainly, but this will acknowledge the existence of sex and some discussion of anatomy and those sort of things. I do promise, nothing graphic. Just one of those things we thought we'd make you aware of. Anyways, let's get to the show.
Behind the scenes at the Poor Historians podcast studio.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the many flaws in the concept.
Fair enough. It's hard to be popular when you oppose your idea of morality on others.
I think it's more complicated than that, though.
Hey, recording day.
Yep. We'll get to it in a minute. Anyway, Alba, I think the point is that self-righteous behavior, while it may curry favor with a select few people, ultimately is just doomed to be unpopular.
I think there's room to explore those ideas in a different arena, but yeah, I think that's why all this is best left in the past.
Oh, I see what's going on here.
You do?
Yeah, totally. I've been in my own head a bit about this episode we're about to do. It's not always comfortable to look at social pressures imposed on the practice of medicine.
What?
Well, I think you'd both agree we should be leery of applying moral values in select situations, as they may involve the health of the patient, right? Values aren't a one-size-fits-all phenomenon, am I right?
Technically, yes, but...
Don't even get me started on the silliness of pretending that the male physicians of the late 19th and early 20th century had any clue or right to make proclamations about women's reproductive health, especially when they were so opposed to acknowledging the existence of sexual well-being.
Wow. I mean, sure, but I don't think that's why right to censor failed as a heel stable.
Oh, what now?
The gimmick was novel for the Attitude Era, but unidimensional, even by 2000s wrestling standards. It was doomed to fail is all I'm saying.
Fair enough, I can buy that.
This is a wrestling thing, isn't it?
Of course it is.
I thought we're talking about Comstock laws, medicine's historical views of women's health, and all sorts of related topics today.
I mean, that would make more sense for a medical history podcast.
I mean, not everything is wrestling, Max.
It is, though.
I'm starting to agree.
Really?
No.
Sadness. Welcome, everyone. This is Poor Historians, the podcast misadventuring into the archives of medical history and beyond. I'm Dr. Max, and I'm joined here by my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Aaron.
Hello.
As well as our medical history intern, Alba.
Hey.
Do you guys have any idea where we think Dr. Mike is this week?
Oh, man. I mean, it's probably on the run. I mean, I think they finally caught up with him.
Yeah, make sure your cell phones are off. So
he looked pretty rushed.
Accomplices. Yeah, I imagine.
He said, "Can you look after the dogs? I got to go." And then he just took off.
Okay. Well, I'm sure he'll come back probably for the next episode. But
notice he said dogs and not his kids, but whatever. I think they're old enough to.
I think they're old enough to fend for themselves. Well, while we're excited to get to our episode and our special guest, we've got to take a moment to thank a new patron. We do have a new patron to welcome to our medical history House of Medicine. A resident level patron goes by the name of Katie. Katie, we thank you very much for joining the PhPod medical history community here, our very special institution. And Alba, Katie asked if she could get a thank you, an Alba thank you in the voice of James Earl Jones. Rest in peace.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best to honor that legend. Katie.
Thank you for bringing your attention to the Poor Historians podcast community and giving us your support as a patron. Much appreciated.
If you appreciate our humble show and you want to get yourself an Alba-sized thank you, we invite you to check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/Poor Historians podcast or via link in the show notes. Get access to episodes early, an occasional bonus episode, and converse with us and other members of the PhPod community. All proceeds go into hosting and production of the show. It is time for our non-medical opinion segment. This is the segment where we take a listener's question and try to give our best non-medical advice on the matter. So, Alba, who do we have a question from this week?
Nobody. We ran out of questions.
Oh, but There's no question this week.
No, but I do have an idea.
Okay, go for it.
What if I ask y'all a question, since I'm in my new internship and I just started out in the clinic and I'm hearing a lot of medical things that I don't understand?
It's not medical advice, so
It's not medical advice.
Okay, I think as long as we take that and we'll do our best. Yeah, well, why not?
Great. You can't possibly make me any more confused than I already am.
I mean...
Okay, the question I have today is, what actually classifies something as a hormone? I've heard things described as a neuron and a hormone, or a vitamin and a hormone, and I don't quite understand what it means to even be classified as a hormone and how something can be both.
That's a good question, and probably something
Max
I think a lot of people
just nail this. Go
Yeah,
for
well-
it, buddy. Go for it, buddy.
totally off the top of my head, with
Oh
absolutely no
yeah,
refreshing.
totally off the
Yeah.
top of your
Yeah, I
head.
totally
Great.
wasn't late because I was Googling Wikipedia articles at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
Mhm.
Cool, I feel better.
Well,
Thanks.
but so truthfully, a lot of these things are confusing on the surface because the terminology is so important, and the terminology can overlap in certain ways. So, for instance, hormone is just a term given to a signaling molecule. This is just something the body makes, or something that is it's something within the body, within a cell, that when it gets released either into the bloodstream or even into just like the cellular goo next to the next cell, it then triggers that another cell to do something. And so
word.
hormones are basically little messenger signals in the form of chemicals. And so you said neuron. Neuron is just a term for a nerve cell. And I think where the confusion probably comes is that you may hear things called, neurotransmitters,
Mm-hmm.
which include those things like serotonin, like dopamine, like norepinephrine, among many others. Neurotransmitters are the chemical signals that one neuron will use to talk to the next neuron and like send the signal between each other. Okay. So the problem is that some of those things like norepinephrine and dopamine are also hormones. So they're both neurotransmitters and hormones. So that can be part of the confusion there.
Oh, it is.
And then you also mentioned vitamins. So vitamins are things that are necessary for like the general metabolic function of the body. And to make things even more confusing, some vitamins can work as hormones because they can be signaling compounds. So vitamin A, vitamin D, for instance, can do that. So I think the classified something as a hormone, it's just a molecule that signals either through the bloodstream or from cell to cell right next to each other, different functions in the body. And then, neurons are nerve cells, and they have their own type of hormones that they use to talk to each other. And that's why this is all terribly confusing.
Word. So like hormone just means what it does. It's just, it does
It's a
something.
messenger.
And that's like, it's the verb.
It's always a
part of it.
messenger.
It's a
Yep.
messenger.
It's the
versus
chemical
the
messenger.
other things are like what it actually is, like what it's made up of, the neuron. and
Well, you
all
got
that
to
stuff.
mix because
Cool.
the neurotransmitters are kind of messengers, but only nerve to nerve, or only in the brain, probably. Yes.
Oh.
Brain, the spinal cord,
tricky
all those
quickly,
places.
spinal
Yep.
cord, too.
Neurotrain got okay, great. I think, you know what? I'm more clear on it now than I was before. So
Okay,
thanks.
Perfect. Well, happy to help. And so,
I
as
feel
you
like we
go
nailed
along your
that.
journey
That
and
was
you come up
great.
with those questions,
got
we
it.
will do our best to sort them out. There you go. So, yeah, it's all about the terminology. There you go. All right. Well, we will sort out ALBA here as we go, episode to episode. And I think, guys, it's about time we just go get into the meat of the main segment. What do you think?
Yay! I'm excited. Yes.
So I am really excited to be joined today, not only by my co-hosts, but also by our special guest. We have with us today Dr. Alicia Gutierrez-Romine, who is a historian and author. She specializes in California history with an emphasis on gender and sexuality, as well as medicine and race and ethnicity. Alicia, welcome to the Poor Historians Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate you being here with us today. And we've got an interesting and I think fascinating episode. We're going to jump around through a variety of topics that you are well versed in. And so, yeah, Alicia, can you let us know what are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be talking about late 19th century anxieties about gender and sexuality, probably mostly through the Comstock Act and maybe a little bit about hysteria.
All right, excellent. I'm glad that we now live in the 21st century where we've worked out all of those anxieties and we have a perfect and clear understanding of these sort of things. But I wonder what it was
All
like
these
back
issues are
then.
settled. Yeah.
What
That
planet
must have
are
been
you on,
terrible.
Max?
They are all in the past, and we have resolved this, which is why I'm here to translate those experiences from the past because we have no idea what they're like at the moment.
Perfect. All right, that sounds like a good time. So yeah, you said you mentioned the name Comstock. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard the name Comstock a lot recently. I think because I watched the Office episodes, and Angela names her cat Comstock, and I
Oh my
started
gosh,
wondering-
really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Knowing the character, yeah, that's amazing.
So I'm like, oh, and actually, yeah. So I'm curious, like, who was Comstock? What happened? What did he do?
That's a really weird name for a cat, considering what we're going to talk about today.
I can't wait.
So the name Comstock is usually made in reference to the Comstock Act, which is already like this shorthand nickname for, the formal title of the act is an act of the suppression of trade in and circulation of obscene literature and articles of immoral use. But
Hmm.
that is a mouthful. So most of the time people just refer to it as the Comstock Act because Anthony Comstock was the kind of architect behind it, and he becomes this really visible proponent of the act, and he becomes a special agent for the U.S. Post Office in order to basically ensure that this act is being followed.
And where are we in time right now?
Yeah. So the Comstock Act was passed in 1873. Anthony Comstock, he was born in 1844. He's from New England. He was in Connecticut. His family was, they were farmers. His mother was really religious. His dad was really religious. So he grew up with this intense religious fervor to the point that he believed that even if he was just tempted by the devil, that he would go to
Hmm.
hell. So he thought that
Wow.
the best way to make sure that he was going to heaven would be to avoid any impure thoughts. And you really have to kind of give it to this guy that he was so dedicated to his own beliefs that when he was, in his 20s, late maybe 19, 20 or so, he's serving during the Civil War. He is not where any of the action is, so he has a lot of time to basically go on these moral crusades. I mean, you have
Mm.
to imagine that his fellow soldiers just hated him because he would like tell them that they're going to hell because they're gambling, or like everyone got a ration of whiskey a day, and instead of giving his ration of whiskey to someone, like being a good bro and like, here, like, I don't want it, have it, he would pour it in the ground.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Nobody likes that guy.
inexcusable.
That guy
No.
doesn't have friends.
He did not. He did. I doubt he had friends.
So what you're saying is that Anthony Comstock is essentially a wet blanket of a human being.
Yes, he is
Okay.
a killjoy. So he is like railing against tobacco, gambling, alcohol. Like anytime any of the soldiers are maybe enjoying the company of other women or something, he is just completely against it. So that is Anthony Comstock. And, when he finishes with the Civil War and everything, he decides to move to the city. And he goes to New York City where he is completely surprised by all of the debauchery that he is encountering.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Uh,
Yeah.
It's just walking around Times Square with a swear jar. Be like, you just said a bad. Put the hay penny in the.
It's like the awful Pocahontas like sequel where he's like, chip this every time you see like a white man, and by the end there's no like little wooden stick anymore.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he's a city boy. I think
Mm.
I mean, it would have been kind of fun to be a fly on the wall to watch his brain melting.
I mean, if he's going to avoid impure thoughts, why would you go to New York City? I mean,
I
Yeah.
don't really have an answer for that, but he decides that he's going to try to reform the city. So he's,
sure.
upset, you know, he's upset with like all the commercialized sex. He's upset with all of the obscene material. So what he starts doing is New York has an obscenity law that was put into place in 1865. But no one's really enforcing it at all. So it's one of those laws that's just kind of on the books that no one really cares about. So he starts going around and buying things that violate the existing law so that he could go to court and basically say, "Look what I was able to buy.
Oh
Why
my
aren't you
gosh.
guys enforcing the law?"
Oh my
Wow.
god.
This guy, this is the kid in class who reminds the teacher of the quiz. Like,
Yep.
he's the worst.
I'm
He is
not, he hates himself. I think he hates himself.
Did he have impure thoughts while he was carrying the stuff he bought to the police station? That's what I want to know. 'Cause
Yeah,
he's like,
exactly.
oh, I really have to buy this so I can show it to the police. Like, sure, guy, sure. That's
So, you know, you imagine maybe he's like walking around with blindfolds, like, yeah, give me
Right,
that
it's
thing
like-
over there. Like, I can't look at it though. So none of this is working though, because he does try to get these obscene materials put into trial. He does try to go through that way, but he ends up losing all of the cases. So he founds the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. And this is an organization that was designed to really try to, you know, regulate and control society's access to obscene materials.
Bet they were really popular.
Well, they
Mhm.
are, because this is
Ow.
when he starts to get traction, because he starts getting wealthy philanthropists to back him, to the point that the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice actually gets lobbyists to go to Congress. And this is ultimately how we get the Comstock Act. They're able to pass this act because they have enough wealthy backers to manipulate Congress.
So you're saying that we're never going to escape this political cycle of money and wealth influencing all of politics, and it doesn't get better, does it?
No,
Mm.
it gets worse.
This is all pre-Citizens United too. Anyway,
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
and you know, at least people are doing this out in the open previously. Like, I don't know if that's better or worse.
there are limits.
It
Because this
feels
must have been
ethically
tough
better.
on politicians, though. So,
Yeah.
because how would you answer if they come up to you and let's start lobbying? They're like, "Well, do you support pornography?" And they're like, "Well, of course not. Of course I don't
Right,
support
right.
that."
Yeah.
And you
So
just
so
frame it.
so Congress passes this act. And so the Comstock Act made it a crime to sell or distribute really anything that could be classified as obscene material. So when we see this in the realm of medicine and health, that actually refers to things like contraception, that
Mm-hmm.
refers to um, physicians or other, you know, quote unquote medical professionals advertising things like abortion. But anything that someone wanted to sell or send through the mail that could be considered obscene, that now became a crime. So anything going through the post office, through the federal mail system, importing those things from abroad,
Hmm.
it was a crime. And the law
Mm.
itself was worded really, really vaguely. Like, I don't want to read the whole thing to you, but if I just read you a couple sentences of it, you can see like how broad it is. So,
Sure.
be it enacted that whoever shall sell or shall offer to sell or to lend or to give away or in any manner to exhibit or shall otherwise publish or to offer to publish in any manner or shall have in his possession for such any purpose or purposes any obscene book, pamphlet, paper, writing, advertisement, circular, print, picture, drawing, or other representation, figure, or image on or of paper or other material or any cast instrument or other article of any immoral nature. And then it goes on to, you know, say drugs, medicine, any articles about the prevention of contraception, anything related to unlawful abortion, anything advertising that for sale or, you know, referencing it at all in any pamphlet. All of that is a crime. The punishment it is a misdemeanor, but the punishment is hard labor in a penitentiary for no less than 6 months, no more than 5 years for
Lord
each
have
offense,
mercy.
or
Wow.
not less than $100 nor more than $2,000 plus court fees.
I picked $100. I picked.
I don't think that's how it works, Aaron.
It's so broad. It's
It is.
so broad.
And then what about, I mean, yeah, speaking of health and medicine, then what, like educational material, like my school books could be considered obscene material, you know, if they have anatomy.
I have an atlas of cadavers behind me that I used in medical school that everybody did. He would not like that. He would definitely not like certain sections of that. And
He
those are
confiscated
definitely,
medical books.
yeah.
He thought that they were, so he becomes the first special agent of the U.S. Post Office for this position. He becomes its enforcer.
Okay, but
And
I don't mean to interrupt you, but it
no,
sounds like they made that up on the spot. They were just like,
Yeah.
you know what? Your job is you're the special
Special
agent of
enforcer,
the
post
and
office.
here's a badge, and he
It-
probably took that seriously.
he did. He is like the worst like hall monitor ever. And so he is just there. He's like filtering through the post office. He's going through everything. And whatever he thinks is obscene, he's confiscating. And then in terms of the fine, $2,000 in like 1873, that'd be about almost $40,000 today. Probably over $40,000 today.
Jeez.
So it's a lot of money. This is something that is, it's a misdemeanor, but that's 50, 40 grand. And anything related to medicine, procuring an abortion, even novels that he thought were too risque, medical
Oh, come on
textbooks.
now.
Yeah, all of those things are getting confiscated. And there were people at the time who criticized this act. There's a couple political cartoons at the time, and one of them, which I think is really prescient today, maybe I can send it to you so you could share it with your
Oh,
followers.
yes, definitely.
But Anthony Comstock, who is this rotund man, he has a very big, like kind of walrus mustache, and he
Well,
looks very much the part. It's white. It's white.
I was gonna say the only thing exciting about this guy's personality was his mutton chop mustache. Like, that is the only thing exciting about this guy.
But in this political cartoon, it's a sketch, and it's Anthony Comstock, and he's holding a woman who is seated, and she's kind of hunched over, so he's grabbing her kind of by the back of her neck, and he is in front of some type of judge or something, and he is bringing this woman before the judge because she gave birth to a naked infant, and that's
Oh my
That's it.
I
God.
get it.
yeah.
I I didn't do a ton of reading about him. I'm vaguely familiar with him, and so I did a skim. And one of my favorite things that I found was how much some other prominent figures did not like this guy. And so my favorite was a woman named Emma Goldman. Did she come up in are you talking about her
I'm
organically?
not going
or
to talk about her,
Okay,
but
I'll
yeah.
just say. So yeah, Emma Goldman, who was apparently an anarchist philosopher, political activist, like a contemporary of his at the time, referred to Comstock as the leader of America's, quote, moral eunuchs. And that made me laugh. I don't think she liked him.
No, and she was also very pro birth control. So that's probably why. And then there's another political cartoon where you have like someone painting. They're drawing a painting, and Anthony Comstock is punching the painter in the face. The only thing you can see in the painting is like a woman like in some type of body of water, but you just see her from the neck up. And then Comstock says, "Don't you suppose I can imagine what is under the water?"
That's a good one.
It
So
seems like
it's
he would, though.
yeah, and that's an impure thought. So
I'm telling you, he hates himself, or he hated himself. Must
Well,
be.
yeah,
It's still not defined, right? I mean, I'm not a legal scholar by any stretch, but didn't the Supreme Court really struggle with defining obscenity even the last time they took a crack at it in the 70s or something?
Well, they knew it when they saw it.
Yeah, they knew it when they saw it. But I think a lot of this is really just left up to Comstock. So they're not really engaging with this too much. I mean, most of the tenets of the law remain in place until about the 1930s. So Margaret Sanger
Wow.
is going to be arrested time and time and time again for violating the Comstock Act in the 20s.
Well, I mean, at least the good news is, I mean, this is a law from the 1870s. Good thing is it's in the past. We don't have to worry about it now.
And
we don't
nobody's
use old
thinking about
laws to
using
make
it
new
now,
No
laws,
one's been
right?
talking about it in the
No.
last month or two at all.
Not at all.
No,
No,
right?
no,
No,
not- no.
right? No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Oh,
There
man.
you go. There it is.
So one more thing to worry about.
Now,
Thanks.
as
Yeah.
popular as all this sounds with like the general populace, were there ways that people would skirt around this law?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you have to remember that we're in the pre-FDA era. So, Food and Drug Administration. So, it's pretty much a wild west in terms of like selling medical devices and medicines and elixirs through catalogs and things like that. And so, what you end up seeing a lot in response to the Comstock Act is manufacturers and advertisers of different drugs and devices, abortifacients. They're basically trying to sell something kind of vague and then putting
Mhm.
large warning labels on it. So, for example, if someone who's like making abortifacients in their bathtub is trying to sell those,
Which just make sure our audience
Oh
knows
yeah,
what
what that
that
word
term
so,
means.
means.
sorry.
Yeah.
So, some type of drug that would induce a an abortion, something that typically when we're looking at like the colonial period or really through this time period, we're looking at things like pennyroyal or other types of chemicals or herbs that are put into some type of drug that, if taken, would induce a woman to miscarry.
Yeah. And
Um,
they've been around for
ever.
been known of thousands of years, I believe.
Wow.
Yes.
I mean, this is so yeah, okay. So yeah, abortifacient exactly are those substances that are known to cause a miscarriage.
Yeah. So what someone might do then is instead say they're selling female pills, and then they might put a warning label on it saying pregnant women shouldn't take these because they'll induce a miscarriage. So they're
Hmm.
technically not selling something that is to induce abortion.
No, they're telling you not to.
Clever.
They're telling
Yeah.
you
Oh,
not
yeah.
to,
Oh,
but
you
if you
really
just
shouldn't
happen
take
to
those.
read between the lines, it's the pill, advertisement saying it's for women's health, blah, blah, blah. But by reading between the lines, women and others who are looking for this might be able to say, okay, well, this is obviously what I need to buy if I no longer want to be pregnant. So they're kind of getting around Comstock with that way, or finding other ways to kind of advertise and market any of these other devices. So, pessaries or other um, uh, devices that are inserted into the vagina or blocking the cervix or into the uterus. These types of things might be marketed as devices to help improve women's health and not as contraceptives.
Basically keep it vague, but
Exactly.
women of the time would know the general use of these sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what sort of things were they? Like what kinds of things were confiscated? And I'm guessing the technology has changed over time. You know?
Sort of a little bit.
Thankfully,
Yeah.
if we look at some of the images of like 19th century IUD type
Mhm.
devices, they're scary. But
Scary. Yeesh.
over the course of 10 years, we have a data point for this, but Comstock said that he confiscated over 200,000 pictures. He confiscated about 21,000 pounds of books
Hmm.
and about 63,000 contraceptive devices.
Wow.
So now I'm picturing this guy sitting in his office,
All
surrounded
right.
by
Just
stacks,
Just stacks.
stacks of pornography
Stacks of porn.
and like these other substances, these devices, and he's just sitting in an office like he's
Trying
collecting
to
them.
avoid impure thoughts. He's like,
This
think
man
clean thoughts,
is the
think clean thoughts,
first
think clean thoughts.
sex addict. I think
Yes.
he's like easily the first documented sex addict. That's
Well,
what I think.
it's like the Scarface picture, right? Where he's surrounded by all the cocaine.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Just
And
porn.
it's medical books and like
Oh,
abortion
that might have to
drugs and
be the episode cover if I can Photoshop that.
Mhm.
It's going to be a weird Photoshop. We might get kicked off of social media, but I'll see what I can do.
But, Comstock's in a weird era at this time. And so, historians looking at this, we kind of think that he's responding to a number of different things. Yeah, maybe he had a weird upbringing and things like that. But the 19th century, as we move into the 20th and urbanization, this is a moment where we're seeing a lot of people concerned with ideas about sexuality. But you have things like access to cheap print material, you have the dawn of photography, the rise of mass production that's making things like birth control, contraceptive devices more affordable and accessible. You have an influx in immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, which is prompting concerns about white women's birth rates, particularly in comparison to immigrant women or
Mm,
quote unquote undesirable immigrant women and their birth rates. So there are a few things that are, kind of stirring the pot in a number of different ways to generate all of these intense anxieties about what we consider moral, what we consider normal and natural, and what we consider to be, proper for Americans at a moment where you no longer have as much oversight within families or in the home. Some historians have also suggested that this is a moment where we have like a masculinity crisis. Fathers within their homes are losing control over
mm,
their children and their wives as wives leave and go to work, or as
Mm.
daughters go and find a job in a factory, or as farms are no longer as not popular, but fewer people are farming, more people are moving in cities. And so we have this kind of unseating of the household patriarch. And so we have a lot of concerns about what it means for women to be public and in the public, and what concerns does that then generate about a father or patriarch's ability to protect her purity, which is a marker of his own
mm.
status in
Now,
society.
what you're saying, it's 2024 as we record this episode. What you're saying is that the first quarter of every century we have to do this every time. Is that what we have to do? Because there's obviously a lot of parallels to plenty of the
There's too
discourse we see
many
today.
parallels.
Yeah, but
If you chop this talk apart and just kind of put out little sound bites, people aren't going to know if we're talking about the late 19th century or today.
I know, but
It's
I
wild.
thought we're not supposed to repeat. I thought we're learning this so we don't repeat, or we're doomed
Not
for the
enough of
past.
us
Well,
learned it, I
How's it
guess.
go
people
again?
need to pay better attention and not fall asleep in their history classes.
Good thing that everybody's attention span is getting longer too as we go forward with our new
Yeah.
technologies.
Yeah. I need to distill my history lessons to a TikTok.
Oh man, you'd have to do an entire presentation that way. It would be I yeah, no. It's incredible because all those things, as you said, if you take this conversation and you just take out the context of the year, these things they are just over and over again. These things that we as society, and it's not just the U.S. You see different forms of this all over the world. We
Yeah.
all we have to keep doing this, and it's maddening. Can you
Just gotta
promise
keep
me that
doing
we'll
it.
stop at some point?
No.
You're shaking your head no. Okay.
No.
Okay. As long as we're trying to stem the tide, but you and I think it's also interesting because this is a time when, late 19th century, early 20th century, that medicine is also really expanding its knowledge base too. And so you have medicine was practiced for a very long time in very different ways. But as you go more primitive with medicine, it's very, well, primitive. It's just they really didn't have the scientific understanding. And you move to this time period we're talking about, and now they're starting to figure out how some hormones work. I think it's the 1930s when birth control is like some of the hormones are first isolated and started to be understood. And so all this is happening kind of before that, but a lot of medicine was just rapidly expanding its knowledge base and the understanding of how physiology works. And so now you have a complex cultural social problem, which is so complex we just keep doing it every 100 years, and at a time when the science itself was becoming relatively extremely complex. And navigating those issues, I think, like I'm obviously joking when I say can we stop, but I do kind of understand why these seem to hit at the same time, and they are difficult to navigate because sometimes hard to predict the future with these type of things, and people don't always receive this change and understand the context very well in the time they're living.
Yeah. And it's not just a moment where we're seeing kind of more science in medicine. It's a moment where the actual medical field is organizing and trying to show itself as professional. Like the American Medical Association, that was founded in 1847, right after Anthony Comstock was born. And by the
Wow.
time we get to, 1858, this is the very first time that the American Medical Association has their own like anti-abortion campaign. They're trying to criminalize abortion at all stages of pregnancy as a way of legitimizing their own profession. So if we kind of take a step back, the general perception at this time was that the only people who performed abortions were midwives, maybe people of color, or quacks, right? People who weren't actually medical
Hmm.
practitioners. And we see a rise of quacks as well in the 19th century, particularly if we look at Western expansion, because most of the centers where medicine was studied were on the East Coast. So think like Philadelphia, New York, or somewhere in Europe. So if you're in the East Coast and you're a professional physician, you're a legitimate physician, you probably went to medical school on the East Coast, you're practicing there. But if you're in Montana or California, where I do a lot of my research, if you just kind of say, yeah, like I know the herbs and drugs, or yeah, I can do that, and you don't have a lot of other options and there's no medical school, it creates an opportunity for self-taught physicians or even part-time, quote unquote physicians to prescribe different treatments, remedies, elixirs, and things like that. So this anti-abortion campaign is really an umbrella under which the American Medical Association is trying to legitimize itself by curtailing that practice, by saying real physicians don't do abortions. The only
Mm.
people who do abortions are midwives, which we need to get medicine out of the hands of these women, even though abortion, childbirth, delivery, all of those things had been women centered events
Hmm.
through this time period, and physicians reclaiming or taking that knowledge for themselves to legitimize themselves as the real guardians of women's health and safety, trying to highlight and illuminate their own medical training at the expense of really everyone else. And so abortion becomes this really easy issue for them to focus on by essentially disparaging anyone who practices that procedure. So by 1858, the American Medical Association is fully on board with an anti-abortion campaign, and by 1880, every state that is in the United States has a law against abortion. That's how effective they are.
It's definitely not the only time the AMA would be like on the picking the wrong sides of history, at least in terms of popular opinion and in those sort of things.
Yeah. I was going to say, thank goodness they got everything else right.
Yeah. We should. Oh man, we should do an episode about the AMA. I don't think
I
they're going to
mean,
sponsor our
should
show
we?
as it is.
Or
So
what if you could do one about the National Medical Association and then talk about the American Medical Association? It was created because the American Medical Association was racist.
oh, okay.
So it was
Wow.
Yeah, let's do
primarily
that one then.
founded by physicians of color who were denied access to the American Medical Association.
Well, that does sound like a good one.
That's
Okay,
an
Yeah.
episode
I
right
Cool.
there.
put that on. Yeah, put that on the
Put
board.
it on the list.
All right. So the AMA, as physicians are trying to get their legitimacy in society, they're using this as an issue to set themselves apart. Okay, I guess I don't agree with it, but I see how they got there. Did the physicians of the time at least have a nuanced and understanding, accepting language when it came to talking about women's sexuality and female health? I mean, did they get that part right? Or
No, not at all, because
oh, okay.
only prostitutes and sex workers use contraception. That was
Oh,
the mainline American Medical Association stance.
so they practice
Um,
safe sex. Okay.
no, because the only sex that physicians believed should be taking place was within a marital unit with a husband and wife, and it should have been procreative. So
Oh, I missed
it,
that. Was that? Did you get that lecture, Aaron? I missed that part. Did they?
Yeah, I miss it too. Yeah.
No, I didn't get that in medical school. Maybe they must have overlooked it. Or wait, maybe have we evolved our position? I hope we have. I think
We
have.
found something. We found something that we've evolved our position on. Yay!
maybe
Well,
a little bit, maybe a little bit.
Maybe a little.
some of us have evolved our position on it. Some
Yeah.
of us not so much.
Oh.
But physicians really believed that contraception was inherently immoral. There's a lot of religious underpinnings to it. And again, this ties back to these anxieties that people have about gender, right? Why would a married woman need to control her own reproduction if marriage is for procreation? So the only people who actually needed contraception were sex workers, and it was because of their occupation. they needed to be able to continue working. So they needed to be able to limit reproduction. So physicians were really against giving women access to birth control because it didn't fit in line with what they believed were proper gender norms. That
Hmm.
within the domestic sphere, proper women, good women, they didn't need birth control. And they also believed that, if we give birth control to people, they're going to be immoral, so let's not give it so it doesn't condone it. So
Hmm.
if you were a married woman at this time period and you wanted to be able to maybe space out how many children you were having or not have children as soon as you got married,
Ludicrous.
Yeah.
imagine you would have to go to your physician and hope that they were open-minded enough or amenable enough to prescribing you something, because if your physician did not support access to birth control, then you were basically out of luck. And of course, your husband had to be on board with it. You couldn't just get it for yourself. But if your physician was against it, again, because it is closely affiliated with this anti-abortion crusade, birth control, it's never far separated from it, then you're kind of out of luck because they think it's immoral.
Hmm.
So then you kind of run the risk too of then, if you don't know if your doctor's cool or not about it, and you ask, then you kind of run the risk of them thinking of you as a hysterical and immoral woman.
Absolutely. And how do they perceive of you then? Do they chastise you? There's primary sources talking about women who went to their physicians after getting married and asked for birth control, and instead of getting birth control, they got a lecture about how immoral they were being and how God's plan for them was to have as many children as possible, and they were trying to skirt their natural duties as women.
I feel like that would really tank your doximity reviews these days, and I'm glad that is terrifying. What were some of the options? Like, all right, if somebody did go and, as Alba, as you put it, like their doctor was cool, like there's a lot, I don't know, there's a lot of like winking and hand gestures or something, like just so that, like everybody's on the same page. What were some of the options during this kind of late 19th century, early 20th century for contraception and these sort of things, birth control?
So there are devices that could have been inserted into the uterus, like early IUDs.
Oh wow, okay.
They again are terrifying looking medieval devices. They're not the cute little kind of like T-shaped copper things that are probably still incredibly painful for
Yeah.
for women today.
No.
I've
But
never heard one of those
They are.
described as cute, and
yeah,
now I'll
cute
never
little.
unhear that.
Well, in comparison to some of these devices that look medieval, there's also Lysol. Lysol was actually
Oh,
created to be a woman's health uh, douche. The idea was that it would be a chemical spermicide of sorts. So
Mhm.
women would insert Lysol into their vaginas, or use Lysol as a douche after sex, after sexual intercourse. You also had sponges, so these would be like just some type of natural type. Sea sponge or something like that could be soaked also in some type of chemical or perhaps even Lysol. In terms of condoms, we've had access to like linen or fish bladder or animal intestine
hmm.
condoms that were accessible prior to rubber vulcanization. The icky thing is that they're expensive and so they were often reusable.
That was okay. I was gonna say that wasn't the first icky thing that came to mind with using
A lot
animal
of
parts, but
that was icky, but yeah.
yeah,
The fish bladder.
Just a bunch of guys
that's
fishing on the lake. One of them's like, "Are
no.
you going to use that bladder, or can I have the bladder?"
but
Also
after
Lysol. I ain't putting no Lysol up there. That
Yeah,
does
that
not
would
sound
probably
safe.
be very
it would cause chemical
irritating.
burns.
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
sure.
that
I would
sounds
imagine.
about right.
Yeah.
Now the sponges were still a thing by Seinfeld, right? Because I think they
Ooh,
did an
good point.
episode about sponges.
And diaphragms. And
Mm.
so we see like diaphragms being used after rubber vulcanization. I think I didn't write that down. I think rubber vulcanization is 1896. I could be off. So
Well, I have no opinion or memory of when it would be,
Yeah.
so
okay,
we will take
I
that.
believe you.
we
Yeah.
could take it and just note like I could be wrong, and that's
Caveat,
okay. That's
asterisk. Listener, put an asterisk.
yeah. But once we have rubber vulcanization, then that's when we start to get other types of contraceptive devices, right? So we're not using bladders anymore of different fish. We're trying to make them out of rubber Unfortunately, some of the earlier ones are like the size of bicycle tires in
Oh
terms of
gosh.
thickness, or they might smell really bad like sulfur.
Oh.
That'll get you in the mood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
Or
sulfur smelling bicycle tire.
I just hope it didn't have tread.
Oh god.
But this is when we start to get maybe some of the softer, more flexible IUDs and diaphragms that aren't like made of metals or some of these other things.
That's a
So
good move.
it does make them a little bit more accessible. They're also trying to sell them through the mail. And so another way to kind of get past this, and I get past Comstock that I didn't mention, was that so you can sell all of these things in, Sears Roebuck catalogs.
Sure. Right alongside the heroin at this
Exactly,
time.
and the vibrators and everything like that. But if you were a reputable manufacturer of these things, you didn't sell them through the Sears Roebuck catalog. You marketed them directly to pharmacists or druggists.
Oh, yeah.
So that was one of the things, right? We're selling them for medical reasons. We're selling them through or just to these very specific people, not to the mass consumer public. And so that made you a little bit more reputable as a company.
Well, and a lot of patent medicine manufacturers would kind of go a similar route by not selling directly to patients. They would take their patent medicine and get a doctor to, hey, you should give this to your patient, and we will pay. We'll get a kickback for each one that you do. And so we did an episode on Radithor, which is a radioactive treatment that was very bad to take, but that was a way that it would get legitimacy by putting it through doctors' offices. And a lot of these patent medicines, like we did an episode on opium and heroin, they would often go through a pharmacist. You could just walk up and buy them. Hey, it's from a pharmacist. So it would take somebody who is addicted to these substances, and it would almost give them also, as the addict, a bit of legitimacy. And they would say, well, I'm not going to an opium den, I went to a pharmacist. It's the same substance essentially.
Right. And there's also like a racial element to it as well, because those opium dens would likely have been in Chinatowns, which would have been another layer to kind of stigmatize accessing that very same drug in another environment.
Yeah, there's a lot of those echoes here. We also mentioned, and by we I mean Alba mentioned the word hysteria. I know I did not bring it up, but it is one thing we did want to ask you about, kind of, as you have probably encountered this word in your research quite a bit. And it's one that I think we have hinted at it in a few episodes here and there, like how I think misogynistic the word is probably a fair way to describe it. Can you talk a little bit about how, in the milieu of everything we've been talking about, that word comes up and is basically used by medical practitioners of the time to other and basically denigrate and control women.
Yeah, but before I do that, I do want to mention one last thing about birth control and abortion, and that is a statistic that until the 1930s, abortion was actually safer than childbirth. So
holy
yes. So that's the one kind of final statistic that I want to mention, is that so when we're considering,
Did you say the 1930s?
Yes.
Wow.
It's after the 1930s that we start to see those statistics diverge, where mortality rates after an abortion are higher versus childbirth.
Is it because of the criminalization, you think, or?
Not entirely, because it was abortion was illegal from the starting some of the 1850s, but 1880 through 1930s. But the 1930s is when childbirth and delivery does move to hospitals. And that's when we start to see the creation of obstetric and gynecology wards. And it's the first kind of era where more women are choosing to deliver in a hospital as opposed to delivering a child at home. So for women who are potentially becoming pregnant quite regularly, right? And if we're considering the odds of dying during childbirth versus dying potentially in an abortion, if you were able to find a skilled practitioner, abortion might have been a favorable alternative to potentially dying from carrying a pregnancy to term.
And this is an era before ultrasounds and knowing a potential complication, something like placenta previa, where the placenta that is the blood supply between the filter, if you will, of the blood supply between the mother's uterus and then the baby's circulation. In placenta previa, what happens is the placenta develops over the cervix, the part that is going to basically open up into the birth canal. And if this giant, very, 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 very vascular filter is sitting over the cervix as the birth process begins, it is a big hemorrhage and an extremely dangerous situation if you know it's coming. If you know that that is there because you're using an ultrasound in 2024 to say, oh, the placenta is down there, we need to plan to do this birth much more safely. That's an era that you're talking about where you didn't have, you had the consequences of not knowing those things. And so
Wow.
I can totally appreciate how the mortality would be affected by not only the circumstances where you're giving birth, but just the knowledge and diagnostics of the time being limited.
Yeah. So let's talk about hysteria a little bit. I mentioned some of the social anxieties that are going on in this time period. We talked about like heightened immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. I mentioned quote unquote a masculinity crisis as well. There's a few historians that have written about this masculinity crisis. Some of them are talking about like economic crises that take place. And so even how despite how much you've been saving or anything like that, you could become bankrupt and unsuccessful by no fault of your own. So a masculinity that had previously been defined by economic success or providing for your family is no longer tenable. The ability to own property for some men is no longer possible. We have more of a class of wage earners. And so this idea of what is a proper man is shifting at this time, at the same time that we have some opportunities for women in like white collar work. So,
Mm.
like in the late 19th century, early 20th century, we're starting to get a little bit of a progressive movement, which is benefiting mostly middle class and educated white women, and upper class white women. These are women who are trying to do things in their community. So, like, one example might be Jane Addams, who is able to, because of her financial position, create this kind of settlement house and engage in these other reforms and not be a traditional housewife or marry or anything like that. So we have this era that you have more women who are going to college, you have more women who are entering professions like social services, nursing, education, things that are still very gendered as women, and they're stepping outside of the home to ask the government to expand its role in society and to improve the lives and working conditions of poor women and immigrant women and sex workers. And so it's these two dynamics that I think are most significant, the changing in masculinity and access to white collar positions outside of the home for middle and upper class white women, that I think kind of frame our understanding of hysteria. And also, again, this increase of immigration and concerns about the white birth rate, right? Because these women like Jane Addams, if they're going to college and they're engaging in reforms outside of the home, maybe they're not marrying, maybe they're not having children, or maybe they're delaying childbirth and marriage to pursue these other
Yeah.
things.
Are we
So,
still not talking about
Yeah, she
2024? People are still panicking about this stuff.
so
It's great. I'm just saying, it's great.
Yeah. So it's 1901. This term was coined by a sociologist, Edward Ross. He coins the term race suicide. And Edward Ross argued
It's
that white
aggressive.
people were competing with immigrants in terms of birth rates, and the white race would die because immigrants were outpacing them in birth rate. So if we look at like the 1890 census, there is a precipitous decline in native born white population. There's a sudden drop in the birth rate, especially when you put it in comparison to this increased immigration. So the argument by Edward Ross and some of these other medical professionals and experts is that we need to put women back into the home. They're denying their natural duties. You
Mm.
have medical experts who kind of create this illness of hysteria or neurasthenia, where they say that women are trying to combat their natural functions. And in doing so, they are becoming masculine. They are engaging too much with the intellectual demands of modern civilization. And this is going to have catastrophic effects on their reproductive organs. And
Mm.
so there's a whole host of medical writers and professionals who are saying that, women's reproductive organs are going to shrivel up. Their ovaries constantly deprive them of energy anyway. And now she's trying to read a book. Now she's
Oh
trying to
my
go to
God, you
school.
scared, bro? Like, just say you're scared. Just say you're scared. It's okay.
So like some
Threatened much?
I like don't threaten me with a good time. Like I'm going to read a book and not have kids. But
Right there with you, sister.
yeah,
Right there
so
with you.
this idea that women are trying to be something other than themselves. Women are trying to be more masculine in a time period where men can't be masculine anymore anyway. And so by women trying to remove themselves from their traditional place in society, they are going to become deaf, mute. They're going to always feel like they're being strangled. They can't live up to social demands and expectations. And so this is really dangerous for women. It's not going to help the race suicide problem. So you have, medical experts saying that girls should not go to school while they're menstruating. You have others who are saying that the intellectual activity that intellectual activity is incompatible with motherhood. And you even have by 1905, like an outspoken group of educators, psychologists, journalists who are just like all of these women who are going to college, who are college alumni, like they have a really low birth rate. Like, why is that? And
Hmm.
so you even have like some different Ivies and other schools that start creating clubs where they're promising that they're going to get married early and have as many kids as possible. Even Theodore Roosevelt like talks about race suicide when he's president and saying that it's selfish for people to get married and not have as many kids as possible. So it really reads as this kind of backlash against women's political participation. And it puts all of these pressures on women saying that you have to carry on the race, that you have to, increase the birth rate. And it's medicalizing a choice to delay marriage, forego marriage, to delay childbearing, to forego childbearing. It is a medical and social response to women stepping outside what are considered appropriate gender norms.
So, if I'm reading that what you said correctly, by opposing the right of women to vote, they were doing it for their health. Is I think the way they were trying to save the
That's
uterus, save the ovaries from shriveling. I'm also checking my notes here, and I don't believe all those concerns came to pass. Did I miss that? I don't think
Yeah,
we had
did they give a time frame?
for the shriveled ovary
Oh, the
apocalypse
shriveled
here.
ovaries.
I don't know. I've been saying mine are going to be, or I've been hearing that mine are going to be shriveled since I was 25.
I
So.
mean, I think if I had ovaries, I would almost want them to be shriveled at this point with the way this discourse is going. But yeah, so again, we just was it 2024? Except now it's different branding. Now it's great replacement theory because that's sounds nicer than race suicide, I imagine. But it's incredible that here we are having this conversation again with all of these themes, almost word for word, playing a role again.
And like the glorification of trad wives, right? That's also, I think, part of this same discourse and discussions about incels and like alphas, and so I think a lot of it is very similar. It's just the packaging is different.
Mm-hmm. We have social media now, which makes this way more toxic.
Well, and
Getting into-
Comstock is still the
Yeah.
basis of what they're trying to actually use, correct? I mean,
Yeah.
so
he's-
like the plan is to use the same act.
Ooh,
right?
we should, yeah.
So-
Let's. Why don't we wrap up with Comstock now? Because I obviously made a joke long ago in this episode about how we wouldn't look to the 1870s to do modern legislation,
Thank
especially
God
at
we
the
moved
level of
beyond
the
it.
Supreme
Oh, no,
Court,
wait,
would we?
wait.
We've moved beyond that. Comstock was back in the last couple of years, was he not?
I think they were talking about Comstock in the context of an Arizona abortion law from around 1850 or so, a little bit before the Comstock Act specifically, but it was, I think, an 1850 abortion law that, because of some other trigger law in the book, ended up potentially going into effect, and so it required the governor to actually say, no, we're not following an 1850 law anymore. So I think that was one of the things.
The one I was fishing for was the prescribing and mailing of mifepristone.
Oh, yes, yes.
As they were
yeah.
making, because I believe they were calling back to Comstock laws saying, well, it is mifepristone is a hormone that can be used to end a pregnancy. It can also be used to treat a lot of other conditions that aren't necessarily related to a pregnancy.
Right.
And so that I believe the Comstock laws were being used as the basis of saying, no, we can't mail mifepristone, because the
Yeah.
Comstock law from 1874, still, and that, I think that's why it's important to talk about these things, not only for some of the maybe obvious reasons, but these laws are still on the books and they are being called to.
Yeah. So it's not until, the 20s and 30s that most of the provisions of Comstock are essentially kind of just allowed to fall by the wayside. There's a few different cases. Margaret Sanger's involved in some of them. So like 1916, she's arrested and involved in a case that leads to one of the first revisions of the Comstock Act. And then 1936 is a U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals trial that basically allows for physicians to mail birth control across state lines. And so with the 1936 case, pretty much Comstock is done.
Yeah, whew.
That's good. I
All
mean,
right.
if it's settled case law, they're not going to reverse it, right? I mean, so we're
They would
we're
never do
fine.
that.
No,
They wouldn't do that.
no, they wouldn't do that. It's precedent. It's precedent.
Stare
Precedent,
decisis.
yeah.
Man, that was a really cool overview of a lot of interwoven topics on these interactions between society and between medicine. And it's incredible and somewhat embarrassing to sometimes read about our forebears as physicians and the way that they thought. And yes, I know, product of times. I certainly get all that, but man.
Now, in retrospect, I'd like to just remove myself from this episode.
Yeah,
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
I
I'm
get
sorry.
it.
Yeah.
As we go towards the close, I think it's a reasonable place to leave it. So one thing we want to do, though, we have to ask Alba, through everything that we talked about, Alba, have you managed to pick and procure an artifact from this episode to add to our PH Pod Annals of Medical History?
I have, but I don't know what it looks like yet. So,
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
I think
Oh,
I
no.
think it has to be a medieval IUD. I mean,
Yeah, right.
I don't know what it looks. I'm scared to look it up, but I feel like that's what it's got to be.
I think
Oh, no.
the Mutter Museum should have a
Oh,
lot of
yes.
images of
Ooh.
different types. So you could look up like IUDs or pessaries and see what comes up.
That is going to be a very interesting Photoshop for me. Thank you, Alba. Appreciate that.
And
Yeah,
then
no
just the stacks of them with Anthony Comstock.
Oh, yeah. That's
yeah.
I wonder if I can get AI to
So that's
generate
the
that.
other option. Oh yeah.
That would be probably nightmare fuel. We will put the medieval contraceptive device into the vault. Thank you once again to Dr. Alicia Gutierrez-Romine for sharing your expertise on this topic. Really appreciate you being here and taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
So if you out there in our audience would like to read more from her work, please go check out her book entitled From Back Alley to the Border, Criminal Abortion in California from 1920 to 1969. I believe available in print, audiobook, and we will definitely have a link on our show notes, and we'll put one on our website. So if you're going to look to deep dive into that segment of this conversation, there is a lot more to know. And Alicia, where can folks find your other work?
So I just had another book that I contributed on come out last month. And so that is Roe v. Wade 50 Years After, and that is by the University of Georgia Press. But if anyone would like to find me, my Instagram is Alicia Gutierrez-Romine, PhD. And that is also my Threads handle. And my website is aliciagutierrezromine.com.
And I'll tell you, I'll make it easier too. I will put links to all those on our show notes. So we will go from there. Really appreciate all of you out there listening, and we'd love to hear from you as well. If you'd like to get a Historians Pod t-shirt or provide feedback, we can be reached through our website, www.forhistorianspod.com. There you can send us messages and find links to our social media sites. We do work to respond to all those posts on our various accounts, and we would like to thank our PH Pod patrons as well for helping make the show possible. If you would like to be a special part of the House of Medical History, go check out our Patreon page through the links in the notes as well. There is a free way to support us, and that's go tell a friend about us or leave a nice 5-star review on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you choose, because if you do, Alba's probably going to read it. So speaking of which, as we close out, Alba, you got another one for us?
I do. ICU Grump writes, such a great show, 5 stars. The Giggles in the Typhoid Mary episode made me snort multiple times and laugh out loud to myself as per usual. You guys rule. Awesome show. Keep it coming. You are entertaining this hag of an ICU nurse.
Awesome.
Love it.
We are happy to entertain. Well, until next time, the 4 historians are signing out. AMA.
What? A heel stable? A heel stable?
What's
what
heel
now?
stable?
What now?
Alba, you're supposed to know about wrestling in this skit, so I need you
my
to...
bad.
Yeah.
Okay. What? How do you say it? Which word gets the emphasis?
It's just heel stable. No, you
Heel
said it fine.
stable.
Actually, that
So you're
was
stabilizing
fine.
the heel, right? Isn't the
Sounds
heel
like
the bad
a heel
guy?
stable.
See how much see how
Okay.
much work I have to do, Alicia? All that
It's-
has to go out.
The gimmick was novel for the Attitude Era, but unidimensional even by 2000s wrestling standards. It was doomed to fail, is all I'm saying.
I'm gonna have you retake that one
'Cause
more
I
time.
have no fucking clue. What
I know.
I have no clue what I just said.
I know, but that's part of the fun for me.
This is
What is the Attitude Era? I mean, I know. I don't
gotta
know.
be
Is that a wrestler?
It's an era in WWE wrestling.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Alicia's like, what am I doing here?